Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Diplomatic Enclave. I'm your host, Omar Khalid. But as you know, the format of our show is one in which we interview different heads of organizations as well as ambassadors, talk about the bilateral cooperation between Pakistan and their organizations, their countries, how they find Pakistan to be, what are the future prospects of the relationship that they have. Today, we're going to tackle a very important topic. That is education. Education that is the highlight of the present government as well. That has been the highlight of Pakistan in the previous years as well. But more and more emphasis is being put on education. Why? Because education is the basis on which we build our future generations. A lot of countries are collaborating with Pakistan in the field of education, but one country comes in particularly in mind, that is the United Kingdom. And once we talk about United Kingdom, that is the British Council that works in collaboration with Pakistan in the education sector, especially with the Higher Education Commission. Now, recently they have come here and they have signed a couple of agreements, and they want to take this cooperation even further by pledging the education of PhD scholars and also to improve this education system in Pakistan in general. To talk about that and more, the importance of education in Pakistan, how should we go forward in countries such as Pakistan when it comes to learning and teaching. We've been joined by three very important and very interesting guests. Let me introduce them to you one by one. On my very right is Mr. Tariq Banuri. Mr. Tariq Banuri is the chairman of the Higher Education Commission. Sir, it's a pleasure to have you here. Our second guest is one who's here all the way from the United Kingdom. Her name is Joanna Newman. You are the chief executive and the secretary general of the Association of the Commonwealth Universities. Thank you very much, Joanna. And it's a pleasure. Welcome to Pakistan.
Thank you.
Last but not the least is a lady that I had the privilege of interviewing some time back. She's a dynamic woman and she has changed the face of the British Council in Pakistan. She is the country director for British Council. As we speak, her name is Rosemery Hilhorst. Rosemery, pleasure to have you once again on our show.
Thank you for inviting me.
Let's begin with you, Tariq Banuri Saab. You joined as a chairman of Higher Education Commission some time back. You've seen the overall system of education in Pakistan. What, in your point of view, do you feel needs to be changed or upgraded as far as education in Pakistan is concerned?
Yes, I joined HEC late May, early June. But I was associated with the establishment of the HEC about 16 years ago, in 2002. I was part of the Presidential Steering Committee that helped set it up. At that time, we had three challenges, and we still have those three challenges. Of course, they have reduced in some measure or not. The three challenges are, number one, access. We want to make sure that everybody who wants education should have access to education, regardless of their income level, their location, gender, or any other characteristics. Number two, quality, that the quality of education and the quality of research should be very high. And should continue to increase over time. And number three is relevance. That means our education should be catered to our social, economic, political, cultural needs, as should our research. That research should help us solve our problems. We've done quite well in terms of access. At the time that HEC was established, about 250,000 students were enrolled in higher education systems. We are up to 10 times as much. It's an explosive increase. I don't think that there's been any other example of such a fast increase in such a short time. And we want to continue to increase that at the same or even a higher rate in the future. And of course, that means more faculty, means more universities, more facilities, etc. In terms of quality, some of the indicators have improved. I mean, we have more research papers coming out. The proportion of faculty with PhDs has increased, but generally the concern is that it is not, that quality has not improved as much, and some people, when I was being appointed, even said there's a crisis of quality that you should address. We've had unemployed PhDs protesting here, as you know. I think it's really a matter of great concern and shame for us that our PhDs are not finding jobs. We've had other challenges like the CSS exam, in which people don't pass in adequate numbers. So there are challenges we need to address. And the third one is that both our research and our education is not really oriented towards solving our problems. I think unemployment is an indicator that what we are teaching is not what the society needs. But it's not only unemployment, it's also things like extremism, it's also other manifestations of dysfunction.
All right.
And those are our concerns. So at this moment, we want to maintain the increase in access, both by expansion and by scholarships. Number two, we want to focus on quality, enhancing quality of teaching and education. And number three, we want to increase the relevance of this education to what we do.
All right. Joanna, Newman, in the Commonwealth countries, and you've been associated with a lot of them, you've met them, you've met the vice chancellors, you know the system of education. When Tariq Banuri Sahab talks about access to education, quality of education and relevance, how much of that has been applied there?
I think you see the same problems across the Commonwealth, but in different contexts. So access to higher education is still a big issue. The global average is 30%. In some developed countries it's up to 76%, but in many countries it's between 8 and 2%. So there is a huge issue of supply and demand. Quality of education is also an issue. There is a real, depending on where you live, I think, geography and economics comes into whether you're going to get a quality education. In many countries, you'll pay for private education at school and go to public universities. And we're trying to work with our universities to resolve that so that you have excellent free quality education from primary, secondary through to higher education.
All right. Rosemery, you've, before coming to Pakistan, been to different other countries, including Italy, Tanzania, and others. What is the general system of education there and here in Pakistan as well as in the United Kingdom? What are the commonalities, especially when we focus on access, quality, and relevance?
I think many of the challenges are shared across different countries in the world, including in the UK. Even in the UK, we have questions of access, particularly with our high fee structure. But in my experience in Sub-Saharan Africa and Eastern Europe and so on, is that again, there is a question of access, there is certainly a question of quality and consistency all the way through. So without controlling everything a university does. In other words, it's important universities have autonomy, but making sure that there are frameworks like the Teaching Excellence Framework, the Research Excellence Framework from the UK, that help set standards and frameworks that particularly new universities can link into. And then the place of research in all of that and how that is developed, what research is done, how it's shared with the outside world and what collaborations happen.
Speaking of collaborations, we've had a lot of collaboration, Tariq Banuri Sahab, with the United Kingdom, with the British Council, and the latest in this beat is the Pakistan-UK Education Gateway. How important are gateways such as these?
Oh, gateway is extremely important. The thing is that, you see, we have a history of collaboration. I mean, but all of that is in some sense random. Right? It basically depends on individual initiative, right? Somebody gets an admission. I mean, if you think about it, if you think of all the great scientists or great academicians in our history of Pakistan, they were all educated in the UK, right? Whether it was Dr. Salam, whether it was Mahbub al-Haq, whether it was Sania Nishtar, Akmal Hussain. I mean, you know, I can give names after names. They were all educated. So we have had a long history. British Council has been with us for a long time, and we worked very closely. I, as a student, used to go to the British Council library, borrow books, and just hang out there because it was a wonderful reading space. But you see, what the gateway does is that it brings the two countries together and say, we have a common agenda. And we are going to now design our programs to be able to accelerate this forward. Number two, it focuses on the areas which are of central importance to us. So the importance that I said is we do want to enhance the quality of our research. So we want to make sure that there is collaboration between researchers in the UK and researchers here. We want to make sure that our students go there for PhD programs and postdoc programs and are able to work with the professors and mentors in the UK. We want to attract students from the UK to Pakistan, attract faculty from the UK to Pakistan. So this actually provides that structure within which all of this is going to take place. So I think rather than a kind of an random individual enterprise-based approach, this is now a systemic approach in which we will
and quite a
pursue.
bilateral approach. I think if you're kind of attracting both sides to it, I think it's not just one side, it's a one-sided affair, and that is how it becomes even stronger. Joanna, you're here for that gateway as well. When you first heard of the Pak UK Education Gateway, what was your first impression on it when you went through the education system in Pakistan, and how Pakistan and the UK could work together in this field?
My first impression is that a gateway or a framework program bilaterally between two countries is the best way to ensure that you grow collaboration between the two countries, because there are always individual attempts by universities, and some of them work, some of them fail. But as soon as you start a collaborative framework that talks about quality, research, education, training, and you put some funding behind it, so you use that funding as a lever, you actually find that after a period of, say, 4 or 5 years, you'll find that the numbers of scholarships have increased, the numbers of two-way mobility. You know, Pakistani universities have a lot to offer UK students and researchers as well. And so as you increase the knowledge through the sponsorship of organisations like the British Council, like the Higher Education Commission, you're going to find that in a few years' time, you've actually increased the capacity in Pakistan universities to grow their own research. And attract students from around the world.
All right, Rosemery, the Pakistan UK Education Gateway is something a bit new, but the collaboration in the field of education between the British Council and Pakistan isn't new at all. How does a gateway such as this one add to the existing cooperation in education between the two countries?
I think it both affects the system, and it's a much more strategic approach in terms of that, which I think is beneficial and will have more impact in the end. And I think it also helps to corral more input from the UK institutions as a whole and from the higher education sector as a whole, so that we can actually collaboratively have more engagement in Pakistan. One of the big learnings I've had over the last 2 years working and living in Pakistan is the size of the population and the size of the young population. Those millions of young people need all of our efforts to help them meet their skill needs and their aspirations. And the Higher Education Commission's new strategy is incredibly ambitious. I don't think there's a country in the world that's tried to grow as much as fast. And I certainly want the whole of the UK higher education sector to be intimately involved in that and supporting, because I know also the UK will learn from that process.
All right, great. Strategy of the Higher Education Commission, that's very interesting, of a British Council head talking about how important and how fast growing the strategy of your organization is. Could you highlight some of the important points of that strategy?
Well, our strategy, I think it's fairly traditional. I think most countries use some version of that. Number one, we want to focus on capacity building. So we want to enhance the capacity of our individual professors, our university leaders, managers, but also the institutional capacity, right? Basically, people need to learn from each other. How do you ensure quality, right? I mean, so we are looking at, let's say, the British REF, the Research Excellence Framework, and say, okay, they've tried this. And you know, these are all, nothing is set in stone. These are all things that you have to try and make it work for you. So capacity building is number one. Number two is we do need to expand the financial base of universities, right? Education is expensive. It is not as expensive as ignorance, but it is expensive. And so we want to make sure that enough resources are there, not only from the government, but from elsewhere as well. And that they are oriented in the right direction. That means if we are putting money in a university, we want the university to focus on excellence, to focus on access, to focus on relevance. If they don't do it, that money is wasted, right? So financing and its use are our second important factor. Number three is regulation. You have to set minimum standards. You have to give people some guidance on what is it that is expected of you. And you have to meet those standards, etc. What is it that you cannot do? You've seen a lot of instances in this country where people try to take advantage of the legal loopholes, and we've tried to block those loopholes. So those are kind of the three major elements. In addition to that, the only thing I would add is that building infrastructure and laying a foundation, both physical infrastructure, information infrastructure is also a central component of this. So our strategy really is these 4 areas.
All right.
But I do want to add one more thing, which is that, really what I think is that the talent is there. We have to make it come alive. Right? It's not as if everything has to be created out of scratch. We have to point people in the right direction. That's why things like the gateway are very important, because it enables people to be pointed in the right direction. Right? That's how we are going to use it. It's trying to elicit something that is inside of people, make sure that they achieve their real potential.
All right. That's very interesting. That's very interesting. Joanna, let's kind of extend a little bit into that Pakistan UK Education Gateway, because that's what is very relevant in this day and age as well. What is the basic vision of this gateway in your point of view, from the British side?
From the British side, I would like the relationship between Pakistan and UK in terms of higher education collaboration to be increased manifoldly. So we have a very large Pakistan population in the UK. We have many, 10,000 alumni who have studied in UK universities in Pakistan, many of whom in really positions of influence. But we don't have as many collaborations as we'd like in research, for example. So by using this gateway to, for example, highlight, showcase areas of common interest like water, research in agriculture, research in aeronautics, and actually look at the common strengths of Pakistan universities in UK, matchmaking really. And by doing this matchmaking at an early stage, faculties will take up the idea, and you'll soon find PhD students, doctoral training centres, joint degrees, joint educational programmes. So we're very ambitious, a new curriculum which can then also be used in schools, because another issue is how universities contribute to school teaching and to teaching teachers. So there's a whole range of areas where the UK delegation who've come with me have expressed interest, and we will be working with the British Council to nurture that over the next few years.
All right, great. Rosemary, when we talk of collaboration, when we talk about gateways, of course that is to bridge the relationship in the field of education between the two countries. But when we talk about specifically this PARC UK Education Gateway, what are the major objectives that both the countries will be working on in the coming months and years?
I think what we want to do is to build on the examples and models that each of our countries have been looking at, but look at how we reach the scale that is needed. To grow from nearly 200 to 300 universities in a matter of a few years is a massive undertaking. But there is experience in the UK of some institutions that began as small colleges. It might be a college of art, for example, that is now a full-fledged university with a much broader range of subject faculties. And I think sometimes that experience can be useful to short-circuit some of the things that perhaps don't work so well. So there is a concept, and one that's been tried in the UK, of what works centres, where people look at, okay, having tried this model, where did it work, where didn't it? And I think sometimes we don't measure where things are successful and why they're successful enough.
Right.
And I think sometimes we can share that more and therefore move faster. And the population here requires us to move faster.
I think that's very important, that the way the HEC has also been moving, as Joanna said, and you as well emphasized on the fact that it's been moving at a very rapid pace. One of the things, Tariq Banuri Sahab, that you mentioned when I was just talking to you was the Research Excellence Framework. What is this framework and how is it going to work in the context of this gateway?
We are looking at the British, framework. It's called REF, and that's a particular system. We also have our own research framework, but the thing is that these are evolving methodologies. I mean, research is really, how good is it? There is a kind of an intangible quality to it, and all we are trying to do is to try to measure it somehow, so that every professor knows that this is something that we should aspire to. Now, the UK has set up a system which is very, very interesting. I mean, they ask universities and even the centers to select the best of their papers, and then those papers are reviewed by peer reviewers, and then they're ranked in 1-star, 2-star, etc. So that's one way of doing it. We have done it in a way which was quite consistent with the fact that we were just starting off. So we had said, well, number of papers, where do you publish your papers? Is it in journal of quality this or quality that? And we feel that now we have come to the point where we can elevate to the next stage. And while elevating to the next stage, we are looking at the UK system as one possible model. And I think this gateway would allow us enough collaboration so that if we were to choose this, we could then implement it very effectively over here. But ultimately, you see, really what we want to do is that the professors should know internally, right? This is good work. I'm going to do good work, right? So they should be able to internalize it.
This internalizing factor is very important. Joanna, A, would you like to add to it? B, how important is teacher training to that?
Before we come to teacher training, if I could just add to that,
Please.
to say it's very important to the professor, but it's equally as important to the society the professor lives in. And actually one of the ideas, one of the reasons that REF came into being was a question about what do universities provide to society. So universities are famous sometimes as ivory towers, where the basic research might take decades to actually come to any kind of fruition. And I would passionately defend the right of universities to do that kind of research because it results in life-saving cancer treatments, for example.
True.
But it's also very important for universities to demonstrate their relevance and impact to the local communities that they serve, local, national and international. And so part of the REF is an impact study. It's something like 25%.
25%.
And that has been very controversial at the beginning. And REF was an
Why
experiment.
was it controversial in the very beginning?
Because how do you quantify impact?
Oh.
You know, how do you quantify impact in mathematics or physics or the arts, for example? So there was a lot of work. I was in one of the original panels for the arts of looking at what measures one might use to measure impact. And so, for example, measuring impact by giving a paper at a conference wasn't seen as particularly impactful, but publishing a book that was really read by thousands was. So that's just a very basic example from the arts. So I would say that there has been a trajectory where universities really feel their social responsibility in their third mission. And more universities call themselves civic universities, have service at the core of their strategies because they understand that their relevance is not only to the students and the scholars that they have in their community, but also outreach to potential students in the future who might not even think that they're able to go to university. So going to teacher training, before I get to that, universities have a really important role in going into schools and inspiring kids and showing kids that actually you too can be a physics teacher or a physics professor. And this is how I did it, because there are many lecturers in colleges who also have been first in generation to go to university. Teacher training is incredibly important. Teacher training is part of an ecosystem that has to involve society valuing teachers, paying teachers, being innovative in schools and curriculums and encouraging the system to allow schools to innovate, and then encouraging teachers to continue in their career. Teaching is really tough, and in the UK it's particularly tough. It's not just in other countries. We have many challenges in the UK with teaching as well.
That's true. Challenges in the UK, challenges in Pakistan. Similarities, differences as far as social responsibility and innovation are concerned. You've been here for some time. You've noted that. What do you find are similar, things that are similar and different between the UK and the Pakistani system of education?
Well, I think one of the interesting things is that we're all about young people. That's why we do what we're doing, and giving them the sort of skills that they need in the future. And what we're all finding is, of course, that future is changing very fast. And as children and students are going through their education, by the time they get out into the workforce, that world will have changed again. So it's how do we prepare them with the skills that will benefit them to be flexible and adaptable and ready to take on very rapid change in the future and to meet not just the technical challenges of that new technology, but actually the social impact of that technology. I think if there's one area of research that does need a lot more work in all of our countries, it's actually looking at the social impact of some of the technologies coming through. And I think for example, one of our delegates is from the University of Surrey, where they have a 5G centre working with the biggest industry names developing 5G technology. And certainly the technical side of that is important, but they're also beginning to get involved with partners that will actually say, well, what difference is that going to make to different demographics in our societies and how we interact with each other? Because you can't just leave people behind when you bring these things in.
That's very important. We should not leave behind when it comes to the different programs, when it comes to gateways such as these. Coming to this, not leaving behind, who is going to benefit exactly from a gateway such as the Park UK Education Gateway, in your point of view, Tariq Banuri?
No, it's meant to be across the board. But because you see, the gateway operates at many different levels, right? Because at one level it is that, you know, people who want to go to the UK for education. Now, those Pakistanis whose parents have high income can always go. So the gateway will primarily benefit those whose income levels are not such as to enable them to go, but it will facilitate them. So at one level, you know, you basically are facilitating the students. They can realize their ambitions and their dreams. But at another level, it also benefits the faculty and the students who are here, because if we set up better systems, if our professors get engaged with the world and are able to solve our problems or even global problems, they become global citizens,
True.
right? So it's a way of investing in every single professor in Pakistan to enable him or her to achieve their own potential. Similarly, if we are able to improve the system of education and research in the country, our students here benefit from it. And if our faculty, if academia begins to solve the problems that confront the society, of which there are many, right? Smog and climate change and so on and so forth, you know, terrorism, etc. If we can solve them, the entire society. So education is really the key to progress in society, and to the extent that we invest in it, we have a widening circle of people who will benefit from it. So that's the dream that we have. That's the one that we are trying to invest in.
All right. Education is the key to progress in any society. Now, the United Nations has a Sustainable Development Goals, Joanna, that are very important after the Millennium Development Goals. How important is education as part of those, and how much are you implementing that in Commonwealth countries?
So we were delighted in 2015 when SDG 4, which replaced the Millennium Goals, included higher education for the first time. And it's a very stretching target that by 2030 all men and women should have equal access to quality education and higher education. I don't think there is a single one of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that could be solved without the contribution of higher education. Whether it is in teaching, whether it is in the research that they do, whether it's in the collaborations with industry and with charities, there isn't a single area that higher education isn't involved in. There are a number of initiatives whereby universities have committed themselves to Sustainable Development Goals, for example in water or in energy or in alleviating poverty, and there are manifold ways of demonstrating that. We're working with the Times Higher on creating a new index on Sustainable Development Goals that will use a different type of metric to try to measure the qualitative effects that universities have. And one of the goals of the Association of Commonwealth Universities is to demonstrate through the mobility programs we run how we're contributing to South-South mobility. But also we want to demonstrate how universities are important in their own right. Quite often in countries where there is a really pressing need to invest in primary education, the argument for investing in higher education is lost, and we want to be able to demonstrate why it's as important to invest in higher education if you want a quality primary sector.
It's very important to invest in both the primary and higher education sectors. That is also part of the SDG goals. How do you implement that in countries such as Pakistan, Rosemery?
If there was an easy answer to that, I think it would be a lot, governments would be lining up to listen to me. But no, it's difficult. And it's very complex. But it helps if your system, if you like, has some coherence, and so that people are looking at the total system from early years through to higher education, to research, and also bringing in industry and employment opportunities as well, because that's also not the sole goal of education, but actually an important outcome for many of the young people. In terms of the Sustainable Development Goals, I think one key area which we want to major on is also the empowerment of women and girls.
All right.
And so it's very important to us that actually we look at how we can support and work with the HEC in terms of getting more women leaders in universities throughout Pakistan. There aren't so many, there are some, and they're great role models, but it would be good to see more and see more young women not only graduating, because I think there's pretty much parity there now at the undergraduate level, but also looking at how they can take their careers forward while balancing that with having a family. You know, I did that and others have done that. It's not easy. And I think it's about helping young women to find the ways and the support that they need to be able to take their careers forward as well as fulfilling those family ideals.
I think that's very important, to fulfill family ideals and to involve all segments of the society. Now, working with the British Council, whether it be in this gateway or other programs, has been very fruitful. How has the collaboration been for the HEC, Tariq Banuri Saab, and how do you foresee that with this gateway coming into effect?
I do want to answer it, but can I say something
Please,
on the SDGs and
Yes.
you know, people who are part of the UN system know that the entire the process towards the SDGs was started under my watch when I was the head of the Sustainable Development Division in the United Nations. I mean, we really started it. I had left the UN by the time they were negotiated. I mean, they were finalized, but the negotiation process had started. So I'm very, fully committed to the vision that has been set out in this. The SDGs have two kinds of relationships with us. One is that we do think that education, and particularly higher education, is critical to achieving the SDGs. So we need to make that a central element. When the SDGs were first agreed, there was an association of university presidents which passed a resolution. They met in Rio in 2012. They passed a resolution with the support of advancing the SDGs agenda, and that process has continued. But the other side is also important, that we need to prepare our students to be able to live in a world in which these challenges are challenges that we will achieve. So we are in the HEC also looking at that process. The gender issue that both Joanna and Rosemery have raised is absolutely fundamental for us. I think HEC has had some progress in bringing about greater parity in enrollments, but not in faculty level, and certainly not at the highest faculty level.
Okay.
And there, I think the investment in mentoring, in grooming, in preparing, in training, those things are very important so that we can enable people to come. And that's really very much a part of our agenda, and we'll continue to look forward to our partners in order to advance that agenda. Our collaboration with the British Council, and certainly in the last few years when under the dynamic leadership of Rosemery Hilhorst, has been extremely, extremely rewarding. I think were it not for that collaboration, we would not be at the point where we are today in opening this door and building upon it. We have sent a fairly large number of students abroad, which runs into the thousands, including people who are doing PhDs. We have joint research programs, including research programs that are funded under the UK's own research funding systems, like the Global Challenge Research Grant. So we have Pakistani partners working on that. But we hope that that is now going to expand even further.
All right.
And new research opportunities, both in the UK and here, we want to bring them together.
All right. We are trying to bring new research opportunities between the United Kingdom and Pakistan, and education is one of the key elements of cooperation between the United Kingdom and Pakistan, where different aspects of that education process are being worked upon as we speak. We are in conversation with Mr. Tariq Banuri, Joanna, and of course Rosemery on the very important aspect of education and how it brings countries together. We'll be going to a short break. Stay tuned, we'll be right back, where we'll discuss a little bit more on the parity and on the system of education in both countries. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching Diplomatic Enclave, and we're discussing a very important element of our society, that is education, an element that makes our societies prosper, develop in this whole comity of nations. And it's very important for countries such as Pakistan, and especially in the context of the amount of youth that are present in Pakistan as we speak as well. Joanna, how important is mobility when we talk of education, when we talk about collaboration in the field of education?
I don't think I can think of a single education or research project anymore that isn't in some senses international. We live in a global world, and therefore mobility is a fundamental part of a student experience, I would argue. Most students aren't able to study outside their country, but I think it's been proven that it will improve your career prospects, it will broaden your sensibilities, it will create lifelong links and alliances between you and the people you meet in another country. So we try to encourage it as much as possible. The ACU runs the Commonwealth Scholarship plan for the UK, but also for other Commonwealth countries. And that has been instrumental in not only changing individual lives, but creating long-term links between universities in different countries. So mobility experiences can be short as well as long. They don't have to be a year or a semester abroad. They can be a summer school. They can be an internship experience. And those are really successful ways of helping people experience another culture, another life, another language, and then go back enriched from that experience.
All right. There's another topic that we talked about a little before in the show, but I'd like to emphasize a bit more on this, is gender parity. You've been to so many other countries, and your organization caters to education, collaboration in so many other countries of the world as well. How much of gender parity have you seen in other countries? And then we'll come to Pakistan and we'll talk to Rosemery about it as well.
Gender parity is a big issue in higher education. It's true that there is no problem at an undergraduate level, roughly speaking. It's at postgraduate level that women drop off because of having families and not enough institutional support to allow women to continue in their roles and have a family at the same time. And so we've been working with Sri Lanka, for example, and with the government, but also with their institutions in creating different types of systems in the university that encourage women to continue. Another issue postgraduate research is many women feel quite isolated in faculty positions, particularly in the sciences where they might be in a minority. And finding ways to build their confidence and also create opportunities for them to advance in their careers is really important. And that is the same in most Commonwealth countries. It might have a different flavour to it, a different local context, but it is the same issue, that you have a bulge in the middle where you have many female administrators and academics, but as you go up the ranks, there are fewer and fewer women.
Has it improved over the decades?
Definitely. It's improved enormously, as has access to education for women. So it's hugely different than it was in our grandparents' generation.
Right. Rosemery, let's take it to a local context. In Pakistan, where you've been working, how much of an improvement have you seen as far as gender parity is concerned?
I think there's a long way to go, and I think it depends where you are. I think in the urban areas there's perhaps more progress because there are more opportunities. I think in rural areas it can often be even more difficult for young women in their communities to break out and do something different, which might be wanting to go to higher education and to get that master's degree and to then have a career that actually is not expected from young women from their particular community. So that can be a tough one, and it can also be tough if they have to look at how they perhaps need to go to access that higher education to a city environment, which they're very unfamiliar with. So there's some very practical help that I think other mentors can give them, other women can give them. I think there is progress, and I think one indicator of that progress is that more of these things are being discussed now.
All right.
And that's a very positive element.
More of these things are being discussed now, Tariq, Banuri Saab, but in this whole parity context, we cannot put behind primary education as well. There are a lot of countries, including Pakistan, where people maybe do not give enough emphasis on primary education as much as on secondary education. HEC is involving itself in primary and secondary education, and in this world of globalization, it becomes even more important.
No, HEC, our mandate is just higher education.
All right.
Right? We only deal with class 13 and above.
Okay.
But the two are complementary. I think both Joanna and Rosemery mentioned it. if you don't have higher education, on the one hand, there's not enough of a demand for good quality primary and secondary education, right? It's one way of of attracting, of making sure that people do well in primary and secondary. Also that, educating people requires higher education, that you need to have teachers and so on. One should not think of it as a trade-off.
All right.
That's almost like asking, are the front wheels of a car more important or the rear wheel more important? You can't run a car without both sets of wheels.
Yes.
and
Both are very important.
Both are very important, and we really need to invest in them. There is a slogan that we have coined in the civil society and in academia in general: 4% for education, 1% for higher education. And that's basically the argument is that 4% of GNP should be allocated to education, and 1%, that means 1/4 of the total, should be for higher education. Currently, higher education gets 0.3. Okay, so we are 1/3 or less than 1/3 of what this sector should be getting. Overall, education gets about 2 point a little bit more, so roughly about half of what it should be getting. So we as a country do need to invest more in education sector entirely, and then also in the elementary as well as higher education, proportionately both.
All
both
right.
of them, right?
All right. When we talk of investing in education, this investment not only is an investment as far as educating the teachers, educating the students in a proper manner, it's also financing them to go abroad, to get the right education from the right university, or for other students from abroad to come to another country like Pakistan, like you talked in the very beginning. You've announced scholarships very recently. Could you highlight those scholarships as well for our viewers? That might be an incentive for some of the students.
Well, I'd like to very much. So we run the Commonwealth Scholarship and Fellowship Plan on behalf of all Commonwealth governments, and there's also an endowment fund in that Prince Harry actually at Chogham announced a new Queen Elizabeth Commonwealth Scholarship, and that is exactly meeting SDG 4 of increasing southern mobility. And so in addition to that, on this visit, we've agreed with the HEC that they are very generously sponsoring 10 new scholarships for students to come to Pakistan from low-income countries and to study in Pakistan. And one of those scholarships will be allocated to someone studying something to do with gender.
All right, gender, we come back to it, Rosemery, and we come back to investing on students coming from the UK to study gender in a country like Pakistan. How important is understanding in this world of globalization in the field of education?
Well, I think what I would say is, first of all, we're at least half of the world, and I think that's important. So the world won't succeed and it won't find a resolution of all the big global challenges without using the energy of women and girls throughout. So that is in everybody's interests. And I think it important too that we look at how we might need to change how societies run and operate so that we can actually use the success of our diverse inputs to find solutions to those big questions of water, climate change, how we feed the world, how we attempt to provide good employment for everybody or help them to develop their own employment.
I think that's very important, and there are certain aspects that people need to understand and get updated on, because in this, as I said, in this rapid world of globalization, things are moving at a very, very fast pace. Tariq Banuri Saab, the HEC and the British Council have been working together since decades. The HEC is also being helped by the Britishers as far as your Vision 2025 is concerned, and now comes the UK Education Gateway. How has this collaboration been from you? I'd like to ask the HEC's perspective, and what do you look forward as far as this collaboration is concerned?
Well, I did say a little bit about our goals, which are really the foundation of the collaboration that we've built up. But to pick up on what both Joanna and Rosemery said, sort of recognition of globalization is and a kind of a global agenda is very much part of our agenda. So, for instance, we have just announced that we are going to invite 10 students from Commonwealth countries, low-income Commonwealth countries, to study in Pakistan. As you know, and we are also giving scholarships for other groups of countries. Right now, our agenda is to try to bring more students, more faculty from other countries to Pakistan, and also try to enable our students and our faculty to go abroad. Now, the purpose is twofold. You see, in education, we have two agendas. Agenda number one is that the older generation needs to pass on its knowledge to the younger generation. Whatever we know, we just pass on. The things that we have, we want to pass on. If there are things that we don't know, we want our students to be able to go to the UK, to go to US, to China, and get that knowledge, right? So it's a way of expansion. But the other thing is that we also need to discover things that we don't know already, right? So the younger generation has to have the capacity to be able to discover new things. Those new things have to deal with the world in which they're going to live, and whether you like it or not, they're going to live in a globalized world. I want the children of Pakistan to be able to be successful Pakistanis and successful global citizens. And for that, we need much greater interaction. Not only for them to go abroad, but also to be able to interact with people over here. So globalization, you know, both the export of knowledge and import of knowledge is very important to our overall vision of education, right? Both, this is something that we know and we want our children to know, and we want our children to discover and solve the problems that they will face tomorrow.
That is true.
Right? And for both of them, globalization is essential, right? That's an essential instrument. So this is very much part of our own global strategy, as it is a part of the UK government's global strategy, right? Their global strategy is also greater engagement. So is ours, right? And education is the one where I think all of these rivers can meet.
Education is also what binds countries, but there's also one aspect that everybody, whenever you ask a young graduate or even a PhD scholar, he says, oh, I'd like to take this degree and after get a good job somewhere. Employment is very important for anybody, whether he's in the UK or any Commonwealth country or in Pakistan. Ventures such as these, the UK Education Gateway, I'll ask this to all three of you. How will they enable the young scholars, the young graduates or the postgraduates to get good job opportunities? Starting with you, Tariq Banuri, sir.
Well, good education, a good quality education is the recipe for employment. It is basically the means. Whether they get that good education in Pakistan or they get a good education in the UK, both of them are instruments to the same purpose. Our goal is to build up the quality of education in Pakistan. There will still be things that people will need to go elsewhere to learn, but we want to make sure that, you know, the basic stuff is done over here. If it is good education, they will find jobs. And to be honest, I actually say, let them find a job anywhere and be successful. My only concern is that if we pay somebody a scholarship, then we would want that amount to be available to Pakistan. So if somebody gets a scholarship from us, goes abroad, finds a job there, good luck to him or her, they should pay us back so we can send somebody in their place. Right? The purpose really is for our children to lead happy, successful, prosperous lives. That's what the whole thing is about. And I think the entire collaboration is premised on that.
All right, Joanna, would you like to add to that as far as your experience in other Commonwealth countries and of course in the United Kingdom is concerned?
Well, I completely agree about what you've just said, but I also think we have 35,000 alumni or so of the Commonwealth Scholarship Plan, of which 90% go back to their own countries and have contributed hugely. So that's very important. I agree that it's really about having a really good education that creates a curious mind, a flexible way of thinking, and adaptability, because very few people are going to enter a world of work where they have one job for an entire career. We'll go on learning our entire lifetime, and I think universities prepare graduates to be open to that and to create their own employment. Entrepreneurialism is really important in universities, whether it's student-led or now increasingly part of the curriculum, to prepare students for a world of uncertain work where artificial intelligence is changing our world so rapidly that we are likely to be going through very many different types of trainings throughout our life. But if we meet that with an open mind and with that firm experience of education behind us, we'll have a much more successful and happy life. And you can see that societies that invest in higher education have a higher GDP and a happier happiness index as well.
That is true. Entrepreneurialism, that's very important, something that Joanna pointed out. How much do you at the British Council work on that when you go on educating the young minds in Pakistan and of course the young minds in the United Kingdom?
I understand that something like 2 million young people are ready to enter the workforce in Pakistan every year, and so that's quite a challenge. For many of them, they can join industries, they can join government organisations, but not all of them will find work in that area. So we do need to look at the entrepreneurial skills that they might need to think, how can I earn a living for myself and those that depend on me? And so that is looking at the sort of skills base that we can develop, whether that's communication skills, presentation, financial management, looking at how you take your business idea forward and where you can get support, and actually how you carry it through, because the first stage might be exciting and grow fast, but then you get to that plateau and it's hard to go beyond that. So that's when you really need solid mentorship to move on that.
And that's where the British Council also comes in, as well as the Higher
Well,
Education
we have
Commission.
a new project that we recently launched called Developing Inclusive and Creative Industries, which is very much looking at helping young entrepreneurs and including through fellowship programs, and we want that to be a 50-50 gender balance in terms of those that we support. So we feel that that is one answer, or one set of models.
Amongst all of the discussion, this is the last question that I'll be asking all three of you. Tariq, Banuri sahab, starting with you. A lot of collaboration happens between the UK and Pakistan, between the British Council and the Higher Education Commission, to promote education, to help the younger generation become better people, and also to bridge that gender gap between the males and females. How would programs such as the Pakistan UK Education Gateway help change the landscape of higher education?
Well, if you're talking about gender in particular, that is part of our HEC's own strategy. So what we are doing is, and of course it's part of the British Council and the UK government strategy, the ACU strategy. So our joint program reinforces that, because we put that as a central goal of something that has to be achieved. Now our goal as far as genders are concerned, number one, to have parity in enrollments. Number two, have parity in staffing, both faculty and leadership and staff. And number three, to create an environment which is a nurturing environment, right? So there's no harassment, there's no sexual harassment, there's lack of a nurturing environment actually inhibits people. So these are the three dimensions in which we would work. And I think this collaboration reinforces those, bringing them together and puts real money on it.
All right, Joanna.
The fact that the Higher Education Commission and the British Council and the UK sector have said we're committed to this means that there will be measuring, there'll be results, we'll look at the impact, we'll make sure that we're nurturing those institutions that want to work together. But I would also say that I head an organisation of 500 universities in 5 continents, and the Commonwealth also really matters for this collaboration, because both Pakistan and UK universities want to work within the Commonwealth. And so I think this also opens up a world for Pakistan and the UK to work with other Commonwealth countries as well.
Great. Rosemary?
I think what I would add is that I think our campuses in whatever country need to be safe spaces, and that safe spaces for young women and young men. And we're currently during the campaign period of the United Nations campaign against violence against women. So I think it's particularly important to be thinking about some of those young women on all of our campuses and how we help them to feel safe, so that they can go from that to actually achieve what their potential will allow them, without being concerned about just the day-to-day safety that they might have on being there.
Thank you so very much to all three of you to have given us this enlightened show about education and how prospects such as the Pakistan UK Education Gateway are going to provide to the youth of Pakistan. Tariq Banuri Saab, Joanna Newman, Rosemery, Hilhorst, it's a pleasure to have had all three of you to talk about a very, very important aspect of improvement in society in Pakistan, that is education. Ladies and gentlemen, the Pak UK Education Gateway is all about building relationships, supporting change and helping young people unleash their potential. We'll be looking forward to that in the coming months and years. Take care of yourselves. Allah Hafiz, and we'll see you next week, same time, same channel. Allah Hafiz.